And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Unlocking the Power in Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. He is one of our very own New Horizons instructors, Eric Satterfield. Eric, you now have the floor.
All right, thank you very much, Maya. And I'll go ahead and activate my webcam here so everybody can see me. Welcome, of course, just like Mayan has already said. In the event that you have not already attended the previous webinars that I delivered, kind of that orbit around this topic for Power BI Part 1, Power BI Part 2, I want to kind of introduce myself to you before we launch into the agenda for the session. So I am a Microsoft certified instructor with the Omaha office of New Horizons Central. I am a Microsoft certified solutions associate in business intelligence reporting and also a Microsoft Office specialist master. Basically, that means I've just gone through some of the certification processes with Microsoft content in particular to ensure that I'm qualified to teach the stuff that I teach, you know, kinds of things that with our organization we're encouraged to do. It's a good idea to make sure that we're not just kind of, you know, throwing random stuff out there, right? Now, in terms of today's session, we're going to be delving into all sorts of goodies related to Microsoft's Power Platform. Very excited about this. It is something that I personally have found very, very beneficial with my own work that I do, as well as have seen benefit and value in my company. And I'm going to try and give some perspective on that and just give you an idea of the ways in which the Power Platform can benefit you. Now, as in terms of like formal agenda content, I'm going to begin by just kind of reviewing the repetitious workday. Just kind of doing a fun little animation series, just kind of walking through normal practices and steps that some of us might have to go through, and then set that up in preparation for discussing the magic of the Power Platform. So we're going to kind of learn about what exactly is this Power Platform, what are the components that are really relevant to us in it, and then I'm going to drill down into 3 of the 4 tools as part of this demonstration process. In the demonstration, it's going to be a little bit different from my Part 1 and Part 2 webinars for the Power BI material, because in those, I kind of approached it more from the mindset of focusing on one tool and showing you how that tool kind of functions, obviously at a high level. I mean, it doesn't, like Mayan said, replace a class, it gives some perspective. In this webinar, my goal is to show you within a small amount of time, you can automate business processes in minutes or even seconds with the power of the Power Platform. More on that to come. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first, as I said, I'm going to kind of just do a little bit of a walkthrough of the traditional business process. And I call this a study in monotony, because we all deal with this, right? Day in and day out, doing the same processes over and over again, the same steps, the same actions, add, hoc, repeat, same process over and over again. Now, in this scenario, I'm going to begin where probably none of us actually begin, which is working with a completely empty task list. I mean, if you're anything like often I have a bunch of other things kind of sitting on the back burner. So this is more of a mythical starting point. But pretend with me there's one of these random days where there's nothing on your list when you start off work at 9 a.m. Now, when you start your day, instantly the deluge begins, right? You suddenly start getting bombarded with emails. You get files you're having to work on. Maybe you're getting survey data, or you're having to run queries against a database as part of your standard workflow. Well, by the time this all finishes, you now have a bunch of tasks sitting on your task list. If you're super organized, fantastic. I personally am trying to be, but I haven't yet gotten there. So typically what this means is whatever is the highest priority, that's what I'm dealing with right now. So like you can see here, maybe one of the critical items that came in last is so crucial, we need to work on it now. We need to take action, and that kind of takes over the other items that we were working on previously. Now, this is nice if we're just dealing with things in our inbox. But often we aren't just having to work with what we get in the email, right? We're also having to work with a lot of other checklist or task items, maybe related to what our team is working on. And these projects, of course, might then require that we interact not only with our own system, our own computer, but also something like an online application, maybe a Salesforce or MailChimp or some other tool that you use as part of your business process. Then after you work with that online platform, maybe you're using that tool as a way to fetch information. And for some of us, this may be primarily what your workday looks like. You receive emails, you deal with those, and then you also go to these online tools and you make changes to the data using online forms and update content. More than likely, you're working with more than just one application, right? I mean, you're probably working with 2, 3, 4, 5 different systems, but this is just a demonstration of one business process. Now, for most of us, I would imagine that this is not as simple as it actually is when we're doing our work, right? I mean, in reality, it probably looks a bit more like this, where we have customers, we have coworkers, we have our boss, all of whom are clamoring for attention. They need something from us. They need us to do something. Now, as such, we probably are going to be stuck in the middle of projects where maybe we're working on updating the system that we normally have to update every day. We're trying to handle and juggle the things in our inbox. Oh, and by the way, our coworker needs a time-sensitive Excel workbook that only we can pull because it's related to a product that we oversee, or it's related to a particular customer account, or it's related to fill in the blank. You know, this could be an RFP. This could be for marketing a flyer that you're having to finish in a short amount of time. But whatever it is, we're trying to juggle already 3 different responsibilities. Oh, and then of course, your customers or your clients decide to send an email. They need assistance on something. And then what does that mean? Now I've got to take care of this thing, especially if that's also time sensitive. And that's another thing that's thrown into kind of the process. Then maybe after we've started to deal with this email and we're trying to balance all of our actions that we're having to tackle with these projects, then we realize, oh, I now need to escalate this to my boss. I need to request my boss assistance on something. Well, of course, I mean, your boss is probably overwhelmed with a lot of different emails and files as well. So when you send off an email and just kind of drop that into the midst of everything else they're having to juggle, it might take some time for them to get to it. What's even worse is I'm sure all of you know, if it goes into your inbox and there's no other place for you to look at it, no other place to check the status on something, it's probably going to potentially fall through the cracks. I mean, I can fully own that. That happens with me sometimes. I get emails, I forget to respond to them for days, possibly even weeks. So then now we're sitting here waiting for our boss to get back to us so we can get back to our customer. We're still updating the online system. We're still working on this time-sensitive project, and we have to also juggle the tasks below. And don't worry, we're nearing the end of this demonstration, so if you're starting to feel a little stressed, I promise there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe then, as part of this process, we're thinking about balancing all these different things. Another customer emails us, and that, of course, means we've got to also reach out to our boss again with another escalation. And did I mention that the monthly report is also due? So now, not only are we having to juggle everything that was already on our plate, now we've got another reporting process in place, and this might even require us to go into a completely different application and reach out, update the data, and then pull that out to make that monthly report that we make every single month and do the same steps over and over and over again. Now, I don't know about you, but I already feel worn out, and this is probably by 9:30 in the morning, right? So we've just barely gotten our day started, and already we're stressed because of all the things that we're having to balance. But what if I told you there's a better way to handle these processes? That there's actually a way for us to escape the rut of what I'll call repetition and inefficiency. And believe me, there absolutely is. This is where I will say, cue the Power Platform magic. This is normally where I would have, some sort of awesome music and we could run out to the stage to show off the power of this Power Platform. Now, I do want to make sure I mention here, this is not going to obviously solve all of your problems. I mean, you're still going to have to deal with email. You're still going to have to do work. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't make it to where you can literally not have to do anything. But I do want to show you how the Power Platform can really help. And it can eliminate a lot of those in-between steps that maybe only take a couple of minutes to do, but when that all piles up, can take a really, really long time. So I'm going to first introduce you to the 4 Ps of the Power Platform. We're going to start with Power Apps. Power Apps is a fantastic tool that allows you to develop applications that can be used on something like a mobile device, as well as also on the web or inside of other tools like Microsoft Teams or on SharePoint, and all of that can be done in a low-code, no-code way, which means that you don't have to be a developer or a computer programmer to really work with Power Apps. Now, it's good if you have that knowledge. I mean, those of you who maybe are on this call who are actually advanced developers, know a lot of programming languages, you'll find that Power Apps has something to offer for you as well. But the beautiful thing is it makes app development accessible to everyone. Then we have what is called Power Automate. This is what is formerly referred to as Microsoft Flow. They did a recent rebrand, so it's the tool formerly known as Flow. Power Automate is the workflow creation tool. And this allows you to automate repetitive tasks so that individuals and organizations can do more in their workday without having to do the same old process. Power Automate is, of course, also comparable to SharePoint Designer workflows, if that's relevant to anybody. And that, of course, is something else just to kind of be aware of. This is a preference for you with some of the work you might do. Now, we also have what is called Power BI. So Power Apps is a tool that lets us create kind of the forms or the processes that we use to collect information and then store it in some system. Power Automate is the tool that would let us send emails and automatically notify people about something or change something in some tool. Power BI is the visualization layer, because Power BI, as you'll know if you attended the Part 1 and Part 2 webinars, is an awesome data analytics tool that allows us to extract, transform, and then visualize our data in beautiful interactive reports. The final P, and this is actually a new one in the Power Platform family, Power Virtual Agents. This is a low-code, no-code chatbot creation tool that basically allows anybody from just a beginning user all the way up to a very advanced programmer to create chatbots that people are able to communicate with and talk to, and do so in a dynamic, oriented way. So no advanced coding, no really complex steps. It's actually more oriented around point, click, and see what happens, and it gives the option for advanced coding work if you need it. Now, for the purposes of our webinar, I am, of course, going to focus in on 3 of the 4 tools. And these are 3 that I personally use on a regular basis. I wouldn't say daily, but pretty frequently with my work. And of course, they're going to be what I hope by the end of our session, something you'll be really excited about and just raring to go explore. Now, I want to push into these a little bit before I talk about the use case that I'm going to walk through for the rest of the demonstration. So first, let's talk about Power Apps. I've mentioned that Power Apps allow basically anyone to create apps quickly. One of the great things to know is you can do this using a drag and drop interface. So, I mean, I've dabbled in like web development, I've dabbled in like looking at other programming languages, and oftentimes you have to write the code and then run it to see what it looks like in the end. Power BI, or excuse me, Power Apps, remember which power tool I'm talking about, Power Apps starts with the visual and then lets you go into the working and the code behind the scenes by programming what those items do. So you'll see here as an example, it's a sample app, and I'll mention this is actually one that Microsoft gives you out of the box. You literally click a button and it builds this whole experience. But you can see what it looks like on the left, an environment that's kind of reminiscent of Excel, and then it creates a result on the right that is this beautiful visual that is built on top of your data. What's also really nice is it leverages Excel-like functions so that you don't have to learn a completely new language. You don't have to learn JavaScript. You don't have to go in and learn HTML and CSS and other languages because it starts with Excel. You can bring in HTML and kind of experiment with that, but you don't have to start there. You can begin with language you already kind of know. Now, once you have a Power App in place, maybe then you want to automate processes so that when an app uploads data or makes changes, something is triggered. That can be accomplished with what is called Power Automate. Power Automate helps you save time by doing your work for you. It can run flows automatically. It can run them on a schedule, and much more. There are a lot of other choices out there as well. In this instance, I actually have a real example that I have configured related to a process I'm going to talk about in a few minutes that basically sends a daily notification 5 days a week, so all the business days, work days, notifications at the end of the day to our salespeople, reminding them of a specific action they need to take for their workday. And this is something that now runs every single day. I don't even have to think about it, and it does all the processing on my behalf. And you'll see, of course, the flow is visually designed, right? Visually designed, yeah, that works. It's very aesthetically appealing. It's got nice color. It's very clear blocks. And again, anybody who's worked with SharePoint Designer will see that this is very familiar. It looks prettier and I think is better, but it is similar to SharePoint Designer if that's helpful for anyone. Now, we not only have the ability to automate our processes by setting up this flow that says run on a weekday, run as soon as something happens, and then do X, Y, and Z. We also can, of course, go above and beyond by then looking at the data that is captured, that is processed, evaluated, and display that in a self-refreshing report. And that's with the power of Power BI. This, of course, empowers you to build beautiful reports like we can see on the right. And again, these refresh themselves. So you do the work one time, and then you don't even have to necessarily think about it. Or when you have to do that monthly report that I was talking about in the demonstration, all I do is click refresh, move on with my life. Power BI does the rest. And if that sounds too good to be true and you haven't seen my previous webinars, well, first I would say, go check them out because Power BI is awesome. But second, because I think those will really prove my point. So just know this is absolutely possible and it's a glorious thing. What's even cooler about Power BI is you have the option to then automatically answer questions you have the moment you ask them, using Power BI's amazing Q&A feature that allows you to type what you want to know, and then it will build that visual for you to answer the question. And again, this is all built on top of data that you maybe have captured with other Power tools as part of the process. Now, I'm doing a very high-level overview of each of these because I'm now going to spend the rest of my time working with a particular use case. And I think when it comes to the Power Platform, seeing is believing, right? So this is going to be where we actually prove this theory, these concepts I'm talking about. And I'm actually pulling from a real world scenario that I just recently implemented with my organization, along with my supervisor, Jeff DeTusco. We were approached by different individuals within the organization. I know one person who's in sales and also a sales manager. We're needing a process to help our sales representatives and also to help the managers kind of know what's going on for our sales team. So basically the use case is, for our sales reps, we need a way for them to be able to report their daily call numbers. So they can say, I said I was going to call this many times. That was what I was planning. I made this number of calls. Here's the potential value, the dollar amount that might come from these opportunities, and some other insights that we need as an organization. Now, in this use case I'm going to walk through, we're also going to see how with Power Apps, we're able to make this possible when people are on the road from a mobile device. They don't have to be at their desk because obviously in some organizations like in ours, our sales reps are sometimes traveling quite a bit to go see clients, go see customers. Probably not as much right now, what with COVID and everything going on, but normally, a bit of travel, and they need to be able to do their work fast, do it quickly from wherever they are. We also need to give them an option for the demonstration I've worked up to even request that a manager follow up on their comments. Maybe there's a time-sensitive inquiry and they need to have the manager check that out and take action. Then on the management side, we want to make it so that for this use case, the managers are notified the moment a request is made for them to take a look at something, because that probably means we have time-sensitive actions that need to happen. We also not only want to send them an instant notification, but we also want to give the managers a report that allows them to visualize the daily numbers. So they can, in the moment, check what the numbers look like right now, what the estimates are, even get a breakdown of things such as whether or not there are things that they need to take care of, and if so, what are they? And all of this is going to be built with that Power Platform. Now, to kind of accomplish this, what I'm going to do, I have a little diagram now to kind of show this. We're going to use 5 different components in Microsoft's environment. We're going to start with the SharePoint list. And this SharePoint list is going to be where I store my data. That's where I actually have built my reporting processes around, because SharePoint is a great tool, especially with the Power Platform. With the list, I'm going to start by creating a flow in Power Automate that is going to check and see when an item is submitted, is a request being made for a manager to look at it? If it is, it's going to send a notification to that manager in Teams to get his or her attention so he or she knows what action needs to be taken. Then I'm going to revisit this process, but actually build a Power App that's going to add data in to SharePoint and make changes to that SharePoint data so that our salespeople are able to do so from anywhere. They're not restricted to going to the SharePoint site or having to go to some other separate place. They're able to use one app that we have full control over. I'm then going to show you how easy it is to not only build an app, but also put this inside of Microsoft Teams so it's right there at the click of a button where our salespeople are working all the time, communicating with each other. So now we're not even requiring them to go into a separate system. They stay in something that's comfortable, something that's familiar, but it still empowers them to do their work. Oh, and by the end, we're also going to build a report that is going to be self-refreshing, that is going to work on top of our data, and is going to accomplish our goals very quickly and easily on its own every time we click refresh. Now, all of that within X number of minutes for the time of the session and still leaving time for questions. This is going to be, of course, a great opportunity to see the power of the Power Platform, and we'll see how this plays out, right? Okay, so without any further ado, now that I've set the stage, set expectations, and hopefully built up some excitement along the way, let's dive in. So I'm going to end my slideshow. I'm going to bring up my SharePoint environment, and obviously I am going to just very, very briefly show the SharePoint list creation process. There's much more nuance to that. Obviously, I am only using SharePoint for the sake of demonstration in this case, but it hopefully will at least give you a little taste of what SharePoint can do if you haven't had exposure to it before. So in this instance, I'm going to my SharePoint site for the state company called Lux Footwear Sales. So it's the sales site for the Lux Footwear team. I'm going to create a new list. So I'll click new, and I'm going to make a list, and I'm going to call this list my daily sales calls. So this is going to be the list that I reference repeatedly throughout this process where it's going to store my data. So in my daily sales call list, I'm going to start with the default, which is a blank column. This will be a column called title. That's what every SharePoint list begins with. Now, because of the fact that my process I'm going to use for this demonstration is not going to need this title column, which is a text column, I'm going to deactivate this. So I'm just going to do this really quickly, and this is not directly tied to the demonstration, so I'm just going to blaze through this real fast just to deactivate it so it's not a required item. Okay, so now pause in the demonstration. Let's continue. So I'm going to now build out this SharePoint list so that it's able to help me basically fill in the details I need for this particular process. Now, SharePoint makes it really easy to build a list of data that you need to work with and also have a form already. I mean, SharePoint builds beautiful forms right out of the box. So I'm going to add a few columns here. When I click Add Column, and I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm doing, Add Column gives me a bunch of choices. Single line of text, location, number, person, choice, etc. Now I'm going to start with the number because I want to put in our call goal. So this is the goal that the salesperson set for himself or for herself in relation to their workday. So this is the goal, the number they wanted to hit. I'm going to then add this to the system. I'm going to add another column, and this is also going to be a number column. But this is going to be calls made. So I'm building out the columns kind of like I would do in an Excel workbook. Then I'll click Save, and this will add that column to my SharePoint list as well. I'll add another column, and this one's also going to be a number column because this is going to be the potential dollar value, potential money that can be made from these opportunities. So I'm going to call this potential value, and I'll say Save. Good so far. So I have 3 number columns, and these are just going to store those numeric values for the salespeople. But I want to go a step further because I want to give the salespeople the opportunity to give an overall kind of status for the leads. Is it a hot lead, a warm lead, cold lead? So overall, is this great opportunity, in which case we want to take action on whatever calls were made? Or is this maybe more kind of, nah, we might want to take action, or is it doesn't seem like this is really something we want to work on? It's more just them letting the managers know what they did for the day. So I'm going to click Add Column, and I'm going to choose Choice. Now, when I choose choice, I'm going to, say that 5 times fast, I'm going to call this overall lead status. Now, with SharePoint choice columns, you put in values you want to have people choose from. Makes sense, right? So I'm going to say it's hot, it's a warm lead, or it's a cold lead. And of course, this could be anything. I mean, this could be categories. This could be from a marketing perspective, a particular marketing campaign. From an IT perspective, help desk, perhaps. This could be, is this an urgent request? Is this a standard request or low priority request? Obviously, this can be whatever you want it to be. I'm then going to click Save. I'm also going to add in an option for the sales rep to notify the manager if there is a request that he or she needs to have made, basically for a follow-up. They want to notify the manager, we need you to check this, right? So that's kind of the goal that was set for us when we started this process. I'm going to click Add Column. This time, I'm going to say this is a yes, no, because I want to say, yes, I do want follow-up. No, I don't. It's a standard report. So I'm going to choose yes and no. This one's very simple to configure. I'm going to type, I want request supervisor. It's simple to configure, but apparently difficult for me to type. There we go. And then I'll say the default should be no. I don't want every single request to automatically notify the manager. Only if the person specifies, yes, I need a follow-up. So I'll say save. The last thing I'm going to add in for this is also a column that allows the person submitting this to put in a request explanation. Why? What's the reason for this request? So I'm going to click Add Column. I'm going to choose multiple lines of text so they can type in a lot of information. And I'm going to call this reason or request. And then I'll save it. Now, I want to show you the work that I've just done thus far with the SharePoint form, because already SharePoint, if you don't know about it, is really helpful for this perspective. I mean, it's where I started. I built my initial process fully on SharePoint and then later migrated to a Power App. So in this instance, I'm going to create a new entry. I'm going to click New, and you'll see automatically SharePoint gives me a lovely form that lets me fill this information in. So I'll put in some examples. So I'll say 25. I'll say 15, I'll put in $2,500, and I'll say this was cold. Now, if I request supervisor follow-up, which I won't, but if I did, nothing will happen right now. It'll simply go into the system, and that manager, that supervisor has to come back and check this to see what took place. Now, we want to automate this process a bit. SharePoint does have some default alerts that allow us to set up automatic notifications, but they're not very nuanced, at least not out of the box. You have to do some extra steps to really configure them the way that you want. So instead, I am going to start up a Power Automate flow that's going to always run the moment an entry is added. Then it will notify the manager if that manager has been requested for a follow-up. Now, you'll notice that the Power Apps and Power Automate tools, two pieces of the Power Platform, are built into SharePoint. This is, of course, the SharePoint Modern experience. I want to make sure I point that out. So this is, of course, SharePoint Online. It could be SharePoint 2019, but SharePoint Online specifically is the tool that I'm working with these tools built in. Now, I'm going to automate my work, and I'll go to create a flow. And a flow is the process, it's the thing that's running. Now, when I click Create, you'll see that Microsoft has given us some amazing templates that do the work for us with a click of a button. So I could literally choose from one of these choices and fill in the blanks, and then that's it. Power Automate will do the rest. In this case, I want to show the ground up process, but notice there are things such as start approvals when an item is added, or request a manager's approval for a specific item, and you could also do this with a click of a button. We're in a demonstration. So I'm going to say, I want to see my flows so that I can start fresh. So I'm going to say, see my flows, and this is going to take me in to the Power Automate environment. Now in Power Automate, I'm going to say I want to create an automate flow. So I'm going to choose the create option. And when I do, you'll notice there are quite a variety of automation options. I'm going to zoom out so you can kind of see them in full. There are automated flows, which is what I'm going to use here. And it's the moment a trigger happens, do something. So this happens, that guaranteed. There are also what are called instant flows. These are the kinds of things that can be run maybe from a mobile device. If I'm on the road, I could tap a button and then it would trigger an action. Scheduled flows are flows that actually run on their own. I think the name kind of gives it away, but these can run every hour, every minute, every day, every month, and you set up the schedule. There are even more advanced flows, such as the UI flow, which is basically your computer being programmed by Power Automate to click, 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 and do things on the screen. And then there are more advanced flows that we're not going to get into called business process. And that's basically if you have stages that you want to walk things through in your organization. Now, for this example, I'm going to choose automated. So I'm going to click the automated flow, and it's going to ask for a name and a trigger. Now the name I'm going to say is notify manager of follow-up request. The trigger is of course the thing that initiates this process. Now for this example, I'm going to say when an item is created. I will point out I could say when it's made or modified. So then if a person makes a change, it would check to see if that change says there's a request, and then that sends that to the manager. But for the moment, I'm going to stick with the simple when an item is added to the list. And notice SharePoint is right at the top. I don't have to go looking. Power Automate brings it to me, another time saver. Now I'm going to click create. And in this instance, you'll now see this is the trigger. This is the thing that starts it all off. Now in this case, I want to put in a specific site and a specific SharePoint list. So from my site address, I'll click on this dropdown, and you'll see it's going to give me a list of my SharePoint sites, and I have my footwear sales site. So I'll click that. Then within that site, I'll click on the drop down and it brings me to my daily sales calls. I don't even have to go hunt down the workbook or whatever it would be that I was working with. It's right here because it's built in SharePoint, readily available with a click of a button. I'll choose my list. So what I'm saying right now is when an item is added to that list, do something. So I'm going to create a new step. It's a new step in the process. This is the action that'll be taken. When I click new step, I unlock a whole new world, and I won't break out into song, for any people who know Aladdin. I won't break out into music, I promise, but this is opening up all sorts of new opportunities for me on top of Microsoft tools, as well as on top of third-party products. And the list is quite expansive. If you check out Power Automate, you'll see a lot of choices out there. For this example, though, I want to use some logic. I need to use basically the equivalent of an if function, and I'll assume that most of us know what that is. If you don't, this is going to be really good news because you don't have to know how to write ifs to make this work. What I'm going to use is called a condition. If this condition is met, then do X. If it is not met, then do Y. Now for this, I'll choose condition. Now with a condition, you'll see there are basically three parts. What am I looking for? If it's there, do this. If it's not there, do that. But this is the way we all wish we could write if functions in something like, say, Excel. I'm going to go to my choose a value. What is it I'm looking at? I'm checking this thing. And this is where we see the beauty of Power Automate fully realized. Because when I click into boxes in Power Automate, it brings up what is called dynamic content. Now, in a nutshell, dynamic content is information that was brought in above. So in the previous steps, this information was made available to you. So you'll notice from the when an item is created step, it's showing me that I can dynamically pull in the lead status, the reason for the request, the name of the person who made it, and all sorts of other bits of information. And this is a beautiful thing because now it's easy for me to accomplish my goals all with just a few clicks. So in this instance, I know that in the SharePoint list, when I set it up, I said I wanted to do the request option for supervisor follow-up. So I'm going to search for request, and it brings me right to that field, right to that column within the list. I'll pick request. Then I'm going to say it's equal to something. Now, because in that list it's a yes or a no, a toggle switch, that is true or false. So true, it's yes, false is no. So I'm going to say if it is equal to the word true. So if it is true that they are asking for a supervisor's follow-up, then act. If not, do nothing. So I'm going to say add an action. Now that I've said if it's true, then do this. Now, when I say add an action, I'm going to then say I want it to automatically post a message inside of Microsoft Teams. Now, I'll point out here, I could click on Teams and look at all of the Teams choices, and there are a lot of them. There are some amazing things, even some new ones that I want to check out, such as creating teams and channels, which if you're probably in the realm of IT, this can be very exciting, and I want to check it out as a trainer because it can save me a lot of work as I have to set up my classes. Now in this instance, I'm going to do a search. I know what I'm wanting to do is message a specific person, message a user. So I'm going to say message user, and I'll do a search. And Power Automate brings it right to me. And I can see here that there is this post a message as the Flowbot to a user option. So I'm going to be messaging a specific manager. So I'll choose that. You'll see then I get a build of basic notification, a basic chat message. I have a headline. What is it going to show at the top? The recipient, who is receiving it. That's kind of like a duh. And then message, which is obviously what I'm actually showing or telling that person. Now for the headline, I'm going to use the name of the person who's sending the request. So in the headline, you'll notice I get my dynamic content, and I'll search for the word name. And notice that SharePoint behind the scenes automatically marks who made it, and that isn't changeable. So this person cannot make it to be that he or she didn't create it, it just is logged automatically. So I can say this person has requested this thing. So I'll say created by display name, the name of the person, and I'll say has a follow-up request. It's a lovely little note. I'm then going to send it to a particular individual. Now, I will mention that if this were a real flow, this would probably be dynamic. It would probably look up the manager for this person and then put in that person's email. In this case, for the demonstration, I'm going to put in my instructor account. So I'll type instructor. It'll bring up that email address, and that's going to be the person messaged inside of Microsoft Teams. Then I go to the message box. In the message box, I'm going to fill it out with a few key components, and I'm going to check my notes to make sure I write this the way that I want to. Yes, there we go. So I'll say I'm going to have a place for a status. I'm going to have a place for the potential value. And I'm going to have a place for the reason for request. So the manager doesn't even have to go pull up some system or pull up SharePoint or even an app. He or she is going to be notified with all of this rich information just like that. Now I just need to plug it in. So I say for the status, I want it to be the status in this list. So I'll search for the word status. And I'll grab my overall lead status value. And again, it's the same as what I had inside of my columns inside of SharePoint. I'll do the same thing for the potential value. I'll search for the word value, and I'll plug that in. Kind of like Excel with cell references, but so much easier. Then I'll do the reason for request. So I'll type in the word request again, and I'll select reason. You can see with Power Automate, it makes it very easy to do these automated processes. And I now want to do a quick test to make sure that it works. Now the testing inside of Power Automate is fantastic because it allows us to just very quickly and easily run these tests, check the work, and show us if it works or not, and if it fails, why. In this case, I'm going to save my work, and then I'm going to trigger a quick test. So I'm going to click test in the top right. Then I'll say I'll perform the action, and I'll run it. Obviously, if this were a class, we'd do slower step-by-steps, but for the sake of the demonstration, I hope is kind of given at least a vision of how it works. Now it's waiting for me to act. So you'll see the spinning circle. That's basically like, okay, do something. Let's act. Let's do it. So now I'm going to go back to SharePoint. I'm going to create a new entry, and I'll fill it out with some information. So I am going to say let's say the call goal was 20 calls. I made 20 calls, value of $5,000. Status is hot. Really have a good opportunity here, and I want to notify my supervisor. And I'll say Acme Tech, a fake company, is interested in buying in bulk. So we have a big opportunity here. We need to act now. Let's notify our manager. Now when I click save, this is going to send all of that off, and obviously you'll see it updates here inside of SharePoint. But behind the scenes, if I go to my Power Automate flow, I now see that it ran successfully, and it's going to show me each step along the way. So once it finishes kind of its refresh here, you're going to see it's going to actually have all of those pieces of the puzzle on display. And I'll do a refresh to make that actually show up so that it actually displays the way that I want it to. And let's confirm that that's actually going to view there. And I'll let this refresh, but you'll see in the background, I'll switch to Teams real quick. And in Teams, you'll see that in my chat, I now have that notification sent with the status, with the value, and the reason the person sent it, all of this dynamically populated for the message that came to the manager. And again, this was done in seconds, minutes. And if I cut out all the talking time, it could have literally been seconds. I'll also point out now that it's loaded successfully in Flow that I have history and I can see it ran successfully. And I can always go back into that history and I can actually see step by step what took place and what the result was as part of the process. Now that's Power Automate built on top of SharePoint. And already that's probably kind of amazing for some people. I know I had a gentleman actually just yesterday in a class, and he was like, wow, this is going to really be helpful for him because he was trying to automate Planner and he wanted to automatically create tasks on a recurring basis. And I told him, hey, check out Power Automate. It lets you actually work with Planner and do that for you. But maybe after we're doing this work, we've automated some steps and I realize I want to build an app now. I need my salespeople to not have to log into SharePoint to do their steps. I need them to be able to do that right where they are when they're traveling. Now for this part of the process, I'm going to go back to my SharePoint list. And I want to show you something really cool. Power Apps is also right here. And when it comes to Power Apps, the app development piece of the Power Platform, I can build my own custom app, or I can build an app built on top of my SharePoint experience. Now, for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to make an app that's already built for me on SharePoint. So I'm going to say create. I will then call this app my call tracker, and I'll click create. And it's now going to build it for me. So hands off, you'll see that the system is going to run. Microsoft Power Apps is going to start the process up and literally build out a mobile-friendly app that can also be used on a computer as well. So I'll let this run for just a couple minutes. And as part of this process, again, I'll mention that if this were a class, we would actually be walking through and seeing how this works, but also seeing how you can have the real fun of building the entire app from the ground up so that it fits your specific use case without having to have it configured the way that it works for this demonstration. I will also point out that the default layout is always going to be mobile when you create from inside of SharePoint. It'll always be the smaller window. That's obviously not great if you're trying to build an app for your desktop. And if that's the case, you could do that as a custom app and it'll fill up the full screen. For right now, it's okay, but obviously I'm thinking mobile first, helping my salespeople on the road rather than thinking we'll all be tied to our computer updating this. Now I'm talking about how awesome this app is, and it is pretty cool. I mean, if I run this real quick, I'll click the play button just to show you I can run it and try it out. When I click play, it works. I can click on an item and it shows me some information. But that main page is a little bit of a letdown, right? I mean, you can see it doesn't really give me a lot of insight. Who is it? What are we actually looking at? What are those numbers? So I need to fix it, right? So what I'm going to do is select this component of the canvas. This is what is called a gallery. And this is basically, in a nutshell, a list of the things that you're pointing to inside of SharePoint. Now notice it built this complex code for me. I didn't have to write any of this code. It just is inside of Power Apps because Microsoft did it. Now what I want to change are what are called the fields. So you'll notice here on the right-hand side, I can say I want to edit the fields, the things that are shown on the page. When I click edit, that gives me a list of the 3 options that are currently being displayed. You'll see title, call goal, and calls made. Now, I don't really want it to look like that. I want it to be, instead of title, which we're not even using for this list, I want it to be the name of the person who made it. I'll click on the title item and notice it highlights where it is. It's hiding, but it's there. I'll click on the drop-down and say, I want this to be the person who created it. Now remember, created by display name from Power Automate. It's the same thing. So when I choose created by, that's the maker. And first, it looks kind of weird, gobbledygook. Oh, okay, that's not what I want. I click on the drop down and instead say name. Instantly, it pulls in the name of the user who made this from the app, from their desktop, wherever it was they submitted the item. Then I want the second box to show maybe, let's say, the actual lead status. All right, so I'll say I want this to be the status. So I'll look for my overall lead status. Is this a hot lead, a cold lead, a warm lead? What are we looking at with it? I'll then also put in that I want the last part, the body, to be the potential value. This is the dollars and cents, and I want that to be shown on this as well. Now in Seconds, I have created an app that allows me to add items, see who has submitted them, and also see what those numbers are. So a manager could use this, and a representative could use this as well. Now let's actually run it again. Now that I've made some very, very quick updates, I'll click play, and I'm going to add a new item. This will add to SharePoint. It's a live app. Now when I click add, you'll notice this form looks awfully familiar. It looks a lot like the SharePoint form, but there are some things like in SharePoint that I don't want. I don't use title. You'll notice there's an attachments. Maybe don't use attachments for this process. We'll clean that up in a moment. For now, I'm going to fill in some numbers. So I'm going to say this is, and let me just check my notes, confirm here. I'll say 25, 20, a value of, let's say, $1,000, not really a big opportunity, and I will say that it is cold. All right, so not really a big bunch of opportunities, and then I'll submit it. When I do, instantly it's added to SharePoint behind the scenes, and it's instantly added into my app view. Now maybe I realize, oops, I didn't mean to do that. That was a mistake. This app is also built already to delete data too. So I can click on that entry, and I can click delete, and it's gone. So in Seconds, I now have an app that is mobile friendly and can automate my standard processes by allowing me to go into the system, select items, and delete them as well. Now, obviously, if this were a full-length class, we would do a whole lot more with this. I mentioned that, I could delete these fields. I could, of course, walk through and add in items. I could make it like some people might want conditional, where if a person chooses, yes, it is true they want follow-up, show this thing. We could do a whole lot of other really powerful actions here. For the moment, I'm going to end this app demonstration by selecting the form. So I closed out of the preview, I'm selecting the form, and just like before, I'm going to edit the field. So when I click Edit Fields, it's going to give me a list that looks awfully familiar, very similar to the one from earlier, a little different, but similar concept. And I'm just going to delete the title and delete the attachments. This doesn't mess with the SharePoint list in any way. It is just changing what is shown on my app. So within Seconds, I built an app that everybody can use. I'm now going to save it and share it. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to save, and then I'm going to basically activate the app. So I'm going to click Publish. Now, publish can sound intimidating. What this really means is this is the version that I want to look at on my phone, and if other people had the app, then they would be working with it on their computers. Right now, nobody else has access, so I need to share it. So I'm going to click Share. Now, of course, when you do sharing, you would share with any number of individuals, right? You could share with Bill and Kelly and Regina and Javier and different groups. In this instance, I am going to put in that I want to share it with student 1. That is a demo account I'm going to use. And I'll say share. Easy peasy. And now that person receives an email about this and also will be able to access this from anywhere. But I want to go a step further. Because right now, people would have to go to that link to work with the app, or they'd have to have it on their mobile device. But what if we're wanting to make it, as I mentioned at the start of this demonstration, where they're able to work inside of Teams, which is what they know and love, and they want to be able to work inside of Teams with the app itself? That is also very simple. If I switch to Microsoft Teams, I can go inside of a particular team. So in this case, it's the Lux Footwear Sales. Doesn't have to be, but that's where I'm going to add it. And I can go to a particular place in Teams where people collaborate and add that app right here. So if I go to daily sales numbers, people message back and forth here all the time. I can click on the plus at the top of the screen. And when I do, I will now have the option to add in from a variety of different tools, including Power Apps. Now, it may not show up at first in your list, so you can do a search and you can select it and use it here. And if we had more time, I would talk all about the glories of Teams tabs, but for now, I just wanted to show you the Power Apps component. When I choose Power Apps, guess what? I can add it, and I'll be able to choose from the app that I just built, and I'll be able to save it. And now this app is going to be visible right in the context of Teams. So within a matter of minutes, I now have a self-updating SharePoint list, a Power Automate flow that will trigger actions, and I also have information that can be actually leveraged in the context of a mobile device as well. I'll also show you that now this is student 1, so I've switched accounts to demo here, student 1. When student 1 goes to the daily sales numbers channel, so this is a sales rep now, he or she can click on the call tracker at the top of the screen, and assuming that it all updates with permissions, there we go. That person now is able to start working on this app right inside of their Teams environment in seconds. So this is now deployed anywhere inside of the company. And if that person adds an item, which I will do, they can fill in their call goal, 25, calls made, 25. We have a huge opportunity in this case of $10,000. It's a hot lead. I want to ask my supervisor to follow up, and I'm going to tell him that Acme Tech is really wanting to purchase, and I'll send that off. Now, this sales representative can then move on to what he or she needs. You'll notice that account item has now been added with that user's name, and it also will then trigger that Power Automate flow in the background, which will then eventually notify the manager too. Now, while we're waiting for that process to run, I'm now going to tie together the last piece of this process, Microsoft Power BI. So we've seen thus far how easy it is to make Power Automate flows, how easy it is to create the Power App built on top of the data. What about Power BI? Well, I'm going to bring up the Power BI environment, and I'm going to say I want to get data from SharePoint. So I'm going to click Get Data. And if you want to know more about this process, again, you can feel free to check out those previous 2 webinars to see a bit more of this in action. Now, in this case, I'm going to say I want to get data from a SharePoint list. So I'm going to search for SharePoint, and I'll choose the list option. Now, when I do this, I have to then put in the URL for the site, right? I have to tell basically Power BI where to look. So I'm going to go copy the URL, and I'll plug this in so that now I have the location inside of SharePoint where this information is stored. So you'll see here it's the site, Lux Footwear Sales. I'll say OK. So it's going to connect. It's going to authenticate. I might be prompted for credentials, which I am, so I'll do my sign-in step here real quick. And once I sign in, you're going to see I'm going to have the opportunity to basically walk through this entire process of inputting all of the information I need, or extracting it, I should say, from SharePoint within just a couple of minutes with some minor changes. So in this scenario, once I connect, it'll show me all of my lists, all of my elements that exist within SharePoint. And in this case, you'll see daily sales calls. I'll check the box. But I look and I say, that doesn't really look all that great, right? That's not all that pretty. I'm going to transform my data. When I click transform, that's going to put me inside of the connection. So before I load what SharePoint has, it's going to let me choose what I pull in from the system. Now, when we look at this, we see a lot of excess stuff that's maybe relevant to some roles, but not really relevant to our sales scenario. Rather than go delete one by one, I'm going to choose only certain columns. So I'm going to say choose columns. I'm then going to uncheck all, because I don't want all of this gobbledygook. I just want the ones that I built. Call goal, calls made, potential value, lead status, requests for our supervisors, and then lastly, I'm going to bring in the author, the creator of the content. Now I'll click OK. Now that feels much better, doesn't it? As I'm looking, I see that my call goal, made, value, all of these are currently not numbers, so I can change them to be numbers. I'll do that so that Power BI knows what they're supposed to be. Potential value, I'll say, should be decimals. It could be dollars and some cents potentially thrown in. And then as I look, I also notice that my author is currently this thing called a record. And this is how SharePoint will always work. So if you use this knowledge for SharePoint, this is how it plays out. In this case, I'm going to click on this arrow, and I'm going to say, I just want the title or the name of the person and their email address. And I'll say OK. And lo and behold, it brings in the name, the email, and now within seconds, I've connected to my data in a dynamic way, and I can then factor that in with my report. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to now mark this here and load it into my file. Once this data loads, I'm then going to use Q&A to build a very, very quick visual to show you how easy it is to accomplish these steps in a matter of minutes. And once the data finishes loading, as you'll see here, I can then double click on my Power BI report page. Once I double click, it'll bring up my Q&A visual, allowing me to ask questions. And I'm going to say, show me the value, the potential value total. And I'll say, show me this, maybe broken out by, for this scenario, the status. I want to see this broken out by status. Instantly, within seconds, I have a hot and a cold and a warm breakdown accordingly. I could also say, I want to see this as a donut chart. And when I type in donut, lo and behold, I now have a donut chart built on top of my Power App data that is stored in SharePoint, that is automated in the context of Power Automate, and then I can just continue to build out my report from here. I could double click, and this will be my very last demonstration piece. I'll say, show me, and I'll say for this example, show me value by, let's say, title, the name of the person. And I'll say with the author.title, student 1 and instructor, and maybe I want to see this as a column chart. And now I can see side by side the different people who created this content, the values, and it's fully and completely interactive. Click, 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 and the report updates. And if I ever need to refresh my data, I can always click refresh. It'll pull in all that data from SharePoint as it's being added and update for my managers as well. And to round this out, I'll show you when I submitted that last item, the Power Automate flow ran again, told me the student account has made a request, and I see all that data. And here in just 34 minutes, we have completely and fully automated a business process, and still leaving 2 minutes for questions. So hopefully that demonstration has given you an idea about how awesome these tools are, given you some ideas on how they can work. And now, Myan, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. I know we're at the top of the hour, but really good information here. If you have any questions, we still have a couple minutes here that we can answer. Just type it in the questions box. Just a couple things here I want to remind everyone about. If you're interested in the material that's presented on this webinar, or if you have questions really regarding what's available to you, please contact your local center for more information. You can log on to newhorizons.com and do a quick zip code search to find the center that is nearest you. And also just another reminder that the session is being recorded, so that'll be sent out to everyone later today. And if you're interested in any other webinars that we have coming up, and that our webinar schedule is up to date. We have packed schedule for October, so go to newhorizons.com and check that out. Let's see, I know we're heading to the top of the hour here. A couple questions. One is, are these tools all free tools, or are there costs involved? I know in previous sessions you've mentioned it, but a few for those who haven't joined us on your previous Power BI, they were just curious about the cost.
Yeah, so when it comes to Power BI, you can download Power BI, the desktop version, for free. Anybody can go to Power BI, I think it's something like powerbi.microsoft.com, and you can download the tool, no account required, but you can sign up for a free account if you wish. The only payments for Power BI come in when you want to start sharing those reports live, but if you're just doing it for you, free download, it's awesome. When it comes to Power Apps and the Microsoft Power Automate process, that will depend on your Office 365, or what's now called Microsoft 365 license. I think it's E3, the Enterprise 3 level, that typically has some of that built in. You may end up potentially having to have an extra license in theory, but I will mention for my company, we currently don't have any extra licenses for Power Automate or Power Apps beyond our Microsoft 365 accounts, which is why I build everything I can on SharePoint, because then I don't have to pay for anything extra because it's already included in our 365 licensing. That's a great question.
Great. And the next question, there were a couple that came in just about the type of data list. One is, can you link an Excel worksheet? And two, can data lists be imported into SharePoint?
Yes to both. Actually, SharePoint, they just recently added a feature like with Excel, where I could actually say, I want to make a list like I did from an Excel spreadsheet, which is really cool. I haven't actually tried it out yet, but I've seen it and I was like, why haven't I known about this already? So you have that really cool new option, and it's really straightforward. You just say, what kind of column am I pulling in? And then SharePoint will basically do the rest. You can also, with the Power App, link into an Excel workbook as long as that workbook is stored in some online platform, so presumably OneDrive or SharePoint. Then you're able to add data into that Excel workbook and pull it out. That's a good starting point. I would say that the experience is a little bit limited because Excel wasn't really made to work quite that way, but you still can absolutely do that, and it can do the trick.
Great. And just one more question here. I know we're hitting the top of the hour. In terms of having different items that were built by someone else, say a coworker, can that be then transferred over to me when I'm using the data? Can those items be built by my coworker and then transferred to me, I guess, is the main question here.
Yeah, there would probably be a few different ways a person could go about this. Actually, one of the ways you could do this, and I've actually done this with my real app that I have built for within the New Horizons context, you do have the opportunity to actually create a drop-down value if you want, and I'll show you here real quick. This is an actual, like the full app. I showed you a brief version. This is the full app related to the app experience I demoed today. When a person goes into this call track environment and is wanting to submit a report, kind of like we were looking at for the session, it has some information related to this. When I add in a report value, I can create a drop-down list that determines the creator. So if it's something that you want to let people swap out who's in charge, all I would have to do is click on this, and then I could search for a different user. I could search for Jeff, who is my supervisor, and I could add Jeff as the person overseeing this item. Now, that's, of course, if you already have that built into your list and it's not out of the box, but it's easy to set up. It's just a person column, works in Power Apps as well. Great question.
Great. I know we are already over time by a few minutes here. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you again, Eric. As always, a pleasure to have you present on behalf of New Horizons. Hopefully we can get some more before the year's end with you presenting for us as well. Everyone, thank you for joining us. We appreciate all the questions and taking the time to join us. If you have any questions, please reach out to your local center. With that being said, you may now log off from the webinar. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Mayan. Enjoy your day, everybody.